My journey was definitely one about being alone. It wasn't so much sharing a dynamic with a team. I was always alone. I was always doing something by myself, traveling by myself, playing by myself, working out solutions to problems by myself. Everything was done alone.
That was Ryan Hart. If you haven't heard of him before, he's one of the greatest fighting game players to ever come out of Europe. But his path to the top wasn't easy. It was paved with loneliness and adversity. Because as a teenager, Ryan Hart was homeless, hungry, and alone on the streets of London.
Such a massive thing to experience, because when you go through that over an extended period, it starts to eat away at some of your most core inner being, you know, and it starts to become a challenge to just, I don't know, it sounds weird, but like just to stay sane.
Starved for both food and human connection, Ryan Hart found that fighting games weren't just games. They were his deliverance from a desperate time.
Like the security that I had created in my head was completely torn apart, and I kind of didn't really know what happens. Like, it's not something you've ever learned about. Like, what happens now? I didn't know anyone that had a similar experience. I had no reference points whatsoever. But the drift of my life just kind of led me to lean on games a little bit more, because, you know, it's where life was easy, to be honest. It was where I can just be okay for a bit, you know? I don't know, like, this was my way to chill out. This was my way to socialize. This was my way to relax, forget everything else, and just kind of be free.
Before he was a 4-time fighting game Guinness World Record holder, Ryan Hart was a 10-year-old kid living in Croydon, a borough in London. And he really loved playing Street Fighter 1 with his friends at the arcade. Arcades were everywhere back then, and provided a social space for kids like Hart to do something together, feel like they were part of something bigger, and just make friends.
For me, I think it just was stumbling upon a minicap station, and what's this, going in there, putting some of my pocket money in, playing a game for the first time, and enjoying it, and that's how it began.
But when Street Fighter 2 came along, things started to get a little bit more intense. The game was obviously more complex, but it was also more competitive. All of a sudden, everyone wanted to be the best. And while Hart was good, he still considered himself to be average. In those early days of arcade gaming, people didn't really travel to other arcades. They just stayed in their own areas and played against their friends. That is, until a tournament was announced in central London, and that really lit a fire under everyone's ass.
I remember one guy came to the arcade and said that in central London, which was like our hub for everything, there would be a tournament, and it would be the first tournament of its kind. There's never been one before, and that was it. This is in 1994. So, to my knowledge at least, this is the first ever fighting game tournament in Europe. I had never heard about anything before that, and people came down in the hundreds from different communities. It was absolutely insane.
Up until that point, many people, including Hart, just saw fighting games as a pastime, something fun to do with your friends. But winning a 1996 KOF 96 tournament was a real turning point for Hart. Before, beating other players was good enough. After that win, though, he tasted blood in the water. But just as Ryan Hart was gaining momentum in a burgeoning FGC, tragedy struck.
There was a situation where the landlord hadn't been paying the mortgage, but was like private renting to tenants, and my family were tenants. And so when he kind of got flagged and was forced to like vacate the premises, we were then made to as well. And that's where it begins, basically. That's kind of how it all happened. And then that kind of eventually ended me up with nowhere to live.
All of a sudden, a teenaged Hart found himself without a roof over his head, facing an uncertain future and literally not knowing where his next meal would come from.
I mean, because there were literally times of depression to the point where like, I've got no money, I'm super hungry, and I would find like 10 pence on the floor, and I'd grab that and I'd be like, okay, I've added that to what I've got, and you know, soon I can buy a burger.
Emotionally, Hart struggled to feel like anyone gave a damn. And left to fend for himself, he felt like he was the guest character in other people's lives.
It's hard to still stay really strong in who you are as a person when you're constantly left alone in solitude, like on a daily basis. But it's not because you're locked up in a room or something. You're out and about, you're on the streets, you're in the city, you're seeing people living their lives day to day with families, friends, partners, whatever. You're seeing everything happen all around you. But inside of being around those millions, you're completely alone. like I had a guy who said I could stay at his place, and then I think I didn't have many clothes. I didn't have a lot of money, so I didn't have many clothes. And I think at a stage where I ran out of clothes, I borrowed some of his. You know, he had like clothes there. He had like a kind of he used this place as kind of like a, I don't know, like a warehouse or something. So I borrowed a couple of the items there to wear because I didn't have any clothes. And one day I came back and he had like sold all my PlayStation games, my PlayStation, my joystick, the bag that the stuff came in. And we're talking like 50, 60 PlayStation games. And that's quite a lot of money. This is way back in the 90s when like these retailed at good money. You know, this was like really premium stuff for me. And for me being in my situation where I didn't have a place to live, I didn't have a job, this was my only money. You know, money. This was my only source of income. Times like this now where this guy had just basically sold all my stuff without asking me just because I borrowed a couple of items of clothing, you know, those things hurt a lot. And it's basically a time where no one respects you as well because of your situation. They kind of look down on you. But I borrowed a lot of money in that time from friends, from people that trusted me, obviously. I had friends who helped me out with food. You know, my friend was a chef in a restaurant, and he used to like sneak me up into his restaurant without his dad knowing, because his dad owned the restaurant. He used to sneak, and it was ridiculous. Like, it was in Chinatown. He'd sneak me up to the restaurant at like insane o'clock, right? Like 5 a.m. or some nonsense when they're still setting up to open the restaurant later, where they cook all the food in the morning. And he would make me breakfast. Before he would start the shift, he would cook a breakfast for me, have me with breakfast on the side while he's actually working. And this is with like all his other colleagues in the kitchen. So it was really, really kind of him. He'd just kind of have me there and I'd have something to eat. And then, you know, I'd go about my business.
To avoid getting dragged down by the sheer negativity of the whole situation, Hart tried to spend as much time around other people as possible. But he also had to do a little bit of self-care as well. That's where fighting games came in. They were another way that he kept his spirits up.
So oftentimes I was very much just kind of in my own corner, like, you know, this is only for now, it's going to be fine, we'll get out of it, you know, and kind of just working through things by myself like that. So being in central London was because it was a very active area. So even late at night, even 2, 3, 4 a.m., there's people everywhere, you know, coming home from clubbing or coming home doing late shifts at work or whatever, just being there at that time. It was a very thriving and vibrant area. So it was nice to be there when I knew I didn't have anywhere to be at certain times of the morning, right? So yeah, very difficult, insecure yourself already. You don't know who to trust on the outside of that. And then you kind of always end up falling back on, well, at least in my case, I did kind of fall back on this gaming thing.
Even though Hart was playing in fighting game tournaments, at the time, he wasn't using them to earn a consistent income. That's because the prizes were usually video games, which he collected and could sell one day.
Because what would happen is I'd win tournaments, and then I would take the games to a second-hand shop to be sold, and then I'd use that money, and then I'd be okay for a while. And sometimes that would carry me to the next tournament, and then I would win again, or I'd do okay, and then I'd get whatever from that, and then that would last me. So it was a very difficult, you know, period where you're not secure. You're very, like, literally there were times where I didn't know where my next meal would come from, kind of thing, like literally like that, you know?
Now, you might be thinking, he was winning tournaments, so he should have landed a sponsor or something, right? Well, the thing is, esports teams and sponsorships were pretty unheard of in the early 2000s, especially for fighting games. Hart's first sponsorship came from a Namco arcade, whose owners wanted him to play against other people because he could beat them faster than the CPU could.
I think initially I was offered a one-day travel, a monthly travel card, a sandwich, and free credits at the arcade. And that was your probably very first ever, tiniest per diem package ever, you know.
Who offered you that?
The arcade, Namco.
This sponsorship from a Japanese company marked the beginning of Hart's lifelong love affair with the premier destination for fighting games, Japan. It was Reinhardt's dream to travel to Japan because that's where most of the games he loved were made. And when he turned 18, that dream came true.
But yeah, I had this burst of happiness in Japan where they really helped me out. And you know, the fighting game community is a special place because someone like me who had nothing in life could find a home in the fighting game community.
Hart went to Japan after winning the Urgai's UK Championship in 1998. His prize was a ticket to compete in the World Finals in the land of the rising sun. But sadly, once Hart reached Japan, he was defeated.
By the time I actually got to go to Japan, fortunately, a few people already knew me there because I A lot of, Japanese exchange students that had visited London had come to the arcade, played against me, and talked about me when they went back to Japan. So when I actually went to Japan, there were already like 5 to 10 media guys waiting for me outside this tournament.
Oh my
god! To talk to me. I didn't speak any Japanese.
Oh my god!
But they wanted
insane.
to interview me, and it was so nice. Like, I felt so appreciated. I mean, you have to remember, they don't know, but back home I'm completely homeless.
After the loss, a friend suggested that Hart extend his Tokyo stay, and he agreed.
It was this adventure, just walking around Tokyo looking for arcades and just learning more, because obviously while you're looking for arcades, you find like, oh, this is a cool bookshop here. Oh, look, there's a nice restaurant here. Oh, maybe I can do this next time, So like, there's all these, it was just this crazy land of fantasy for a long time. And I think that's probably why, at least now, especially being a dying breed, the arcade life in Japan will always be very, very special in my heart.
During his 2-month adventure in Japan, Hart entered the King of Fighters 98 World Tournament, and he won.
That tournament, it was up on a poster in that Playmax arcade, and that's how I found out about it. It was just on a poster, 25th of September, come down to this tournament, And and so I went, and it was really far.
It's the world tournament?
It was, King of Fighters 98 World Championship.
But it wasn't all fame and glory. Far from it. Hart was in unfamiliar territory, and the Japanese arcade gamers were wiping the floor with him.
They were beating me in such a way where I couldn't even put any pieces together. I didn't know why they knew this and that. And they were able to just play. They could start toying with your mind and, really start infiltrating your brain. It's horrible. It's a horrible feeling when someone's in your head.
His very first loss on Japanese soil came at the hands of an elderly shopkeeper.
Found like what looked like a newspaper shop that we'd have in the UK, like a sweet shop. And I went in there, and there was one arcade cabinet in this small shop, just one arcade cabinet, back-to-back screens. So I sit down, put my coin in, it was 100 yen a credit, and I start playing. It was Virtua Fighter 3 at that time, TB, so you pick 3 characters. And I'm there playing this game against a computer, and the game, all of a sudden, it said, here comes a new challenge. And I'm like, what? I'm looking around, because the shop's completely empty. There's not a single customer in the shop. I look up, and the old man, the shop owner, is challenging me. So I'm like, what? This guy kicked my ass so badly. I could not, like this old dude, gray hair. I'm like, what's going on?
And that was just the first of many losses Hart experienced in Japan. Over time, losing over and over again to amateur Japanese players got too hard to handle.
But getting battered every day for hours, it's too much after a certain amount of time, especially if you're someone who's supposedly, where you're from, you've got stature, you're someone. But when I went there, it was just hardcore.
Yet again, Hart felt isolated. He couldn't speak the language, and everyone he knew was on the other side of the world. Hart knew he was at a disadvantage against the Japanese players, who had a ton of information at their disposal, thanks to both strategy guides called MOOCs and the fact that they could just talk to each other about the games.
It was really hard because they had so much more at their disposal than I did. They had what are called MOOCs, magazine books, where it's basically a magazine which teaches you how to play the game. And these can contain everything from match versus, character match tips, to frame data, to combo DVDs, to exhibition matches. Like literally everything you could ever need to master a fight could be contained in one book.
Ultimately, after running the Japanese arcade gauntlet day after day, Hart began to see his newfound vulnerability as a learning opportunity.
Because to get better, you need to learn by losing.
Right.
To improve, to actually be good, you need to lose a lot first.
He used the infamous Shinjuku Sportsland arcade as a kind of dojo, facing opponent after opponent. But like his own personal kryptonite, that feeling of being left out continued to plague Hart.
You also had that they were congregating and talking about things and sharing things together and having matches to test certain strategies and all of this, even though they were all happening in front of me, because I couldn't understand the dialogue, I wasn't connected to any of that. So, and that also adds to the feeling of loneliness and, I'm by myself here, it doesn't help you to feel good about the scenario.
But there was definitely a light at the end of the tunnel. See, as the day went on, the opponents at the arcade got stronger and stronger. But gradually, Hart noticed that he was staying on the sticks longer, and he was knocking rival after rival off the machine.
The strongest players came down later in the day. The earlier in the day it was, the more wins you could get. That was the unwritten rule. If you go there at 12 p.m, you can probably get 10 wins in a row because the players are not that good. The later it gets, the higher the level gets. So by 10 p.m, if you're still playing, you're one of the best. But you won't be playing because you'll have been beaten by that time because they're just too good. My test would be how late can I stay on till? You know? And yeah, there were times where I could play till 4 p.m. and then I'd get kicked off. You know, someone would beat me at 4 and at 4. And then the next, I think a week later, I lost and it was 6 p.m. I was, oh wow, a bit later. This progress. This is great. But yeah, after about a month and a week of staying in Japan, just playing games every day, I think there was this time where I got 26 wins in a row. The first time it ever happened where I got 20. So the first time that I remember seeing a 2 in front, when I hit 20, I'm like, oh my God, 20 wins in a row. And I got a 26 streak and then I lost. And I was really upset, man, I could have had that if I did a low kick, and I was going over what I messed up on. And I looked at the time and it was 10:10. It was 10:10. Late, really late. And I looked around, it's just all top heads. And so yeah, after about a month and a week, only the best players could, take me off.
And finally, after 2 months, it was time for the prodigal son to return home. In the end, outside of whatever time he spent traveling, Hart had nowhere to live for just over 2 years, relying on the kindness of friends and his mother just to get by.
After that couple of years, my friend had said I could stay at his place for some time, and I stayed there, and then eventually got a property back. I think I moved back in with my mom at some point. She got a place, and then moved back in with my mom, and I had my own room again and everything. So, but it was different. I was matured. I'd seen some stuff, I'd experienced things, a lot had changed. A lot of irreversible things had changed, so it was different. Yeah, it really was.
The experience also made Hart a more resilient player, who could use gaming to better fit in with the world around him.
My drive back then was being a very fierce competitor, but also just having a natural love and passion for the community and for the games themselves because of how deep they were and how much you could express yourself through these games. It was just about creative expression for me.
By 2009, Hart had proved himself, and he joined his first real esports team, Lowland Lions, as the head of their fighting game division. But even after making the big leagues, he still felt his old adversary creeping up on him.
This team factor I didn't get embedded in that naturally. It was very I was very distant from that originally. Even though I was on the team, I was still playing for myself,
In time, Hart warmed up to the team dynamic. He knew that there were people that depended on him.
So that changed after some months. I think I matured in that area. I think I started to learn the bigger picture, so to speak. I started to learn more about what the value of player branding, the value of, being a team member, what that means, how you need to represent, how you present yourself, wearing the team jersey, just all these different extra elements that come in when you're actually part of a team, right?
Ryan Hart has worn many hats over the years. On top of being a pro gamer, Hart has also worked as a commentator, tournament organizer, event host, presenter, translator, model, and content creator. After all, as impressive as holding 4 Guinness World Records is, including one for the most international Street Fighter tournament wins, none of that pays the bills. These days, Hart hopes to support the up-and-coming generation of gamers by being the mentor that he himself never had.
I didn't have anyone I could then turn to and ask for support, and that's horrible. People say, yeah, but you learn from that, but it was a horrible experience to learn in that way. I'd much rather have had someone who could go through it with me and say, hey, this is what you need to work on. And then I work on that by myself. And then that's still good because I still learn, but I don't spend a lot of time in agony and anguish wondering and worrying if I'm doing the right thing.
So, what's next for Ryan Hart? Well, his aspirations are pretty humble.
I'd like my movements, my work, my effort to help people to push themselves in whatever they're doing. And I hope that could come from people that play after me or do anything, any endeavor after me. Might not be games.
To date, Hart has won over 100 fighting game tournaments in 5 continents across 25 countries, including 2 EVO World Championships. But what lies beyond this victory? Just like a real-life Ryu, the Wandering Warrior, Ryan Hart will continue to master his fighting game skills. After all, you can't beat a real fighter.
Thanks for watching. If you want more content like this, hit the sub button and ring that notification bell. For unique bite-sized videos you won't find anywhere else, hit up our Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook pages.